So this is a video that I'm a little surprised I have to do, but I have to remind myself that a lot of people that are still new to this industry, new to the turbo four bangers and the Subaru scene. And so I get irritated because I feel like everybody should know this, and it's dumb because not everyone knows this, and I should know that. But so I apologize if I seem irritated during this. I really shouldn't be. I think it's just because the subject itself bugs me so much. And so the subject is strictly blow-off valves on a MAF controlled car. So I'm going to explain why they are not good, and I'm going to try and do it quick. I know I say it all the time, and my videos last forever. So I'm going to try really hard this time to do it quick. So this here is, people call it the intake, right? It's not the intake manifold, this is the intake. This is where the air comes in from the outside, right? Goes through this filter and then goes into the engine. Well, the key part of this intake is this little guy right here. This is the mass airflow sensor. I don't know if you can see it's lighting or not. Let's change it. There we go. Mass airflow sensor. Now, in my other videos, I talk a little bit about which intake is better for your car and why. Watch that one to learn some more stuff about this intake and what's important about it. As far as blow-off valves are concerned, blow-off valves are bad on cars that use the mass airflow sensor because everything that is calculated in the ECU comes from this sensor. Every calculation is based off of this. Ignition, fuel, you freaking name it, it comes off this sensor. And so if the signal that this sensor is providing the ECU is wrong, then every calculation is wrong. Now, people say, well, can't you tune that out? Well, the answer is no. You can't tune out a blow-off valve unless you take the car into speed density, which is a whole nother story, but that means basically disabling the mass airflow sensor and utilizing just the MAP sensor, manifold absolute pressure sensor. And some people act like speed density is the cat's meow, and it's not the case. It's good, but knowing how much air is actually going into the engine via the mass airflow sensor is more accurate than estimating how much air is going into the engine via speed density. Now, this is better. It's only better if it works. And then for it to work, the air signal has to be accurate. For it to be accurate, you can't take air that goes past this filter, past this sensor, and then dump it to atmosphere. If you dump it to atmosphere, it's not accurate, and therefore nothing is accurate. Now, what people don't realize is the reason that it's really bad is that when the blow-off valve opens, the air across this sensor, there's a lot of air moving across the sensor and the voltage is really high. And there's a delay. There's a delay from when you let off the gas until the fuel is cut to the motor. During that period of time, you are dumping high levels of air to the atmosphere. And so during that time, the ECU sees all that air, thinks it's going into the engine because the sensor told it is, and adds the corresponding amount of fuel for it. Now, what does that do? That causes you to have hesitations. That causes the car to run rich momentarily. It slows your boost response. It might even give the driver a perceivable hesitation in the car as he's in between gears. If your blow-off valve is set to lift too easily, then it can also affect you at idle. It can open at inopportune times during high amounts of engine vacuum. So if you're just coming off of a long decel and you're engine braking and you push the clutch in, the ECU says, oh, I need to add fuel. And if that valve is open, it sees the air going past the mass airflow sensor, out the valve, and again, it assumes it's going into the engine, and therefore adds all the fuel into it, and it makes the car stall or die, which obviously is not ideal. The purpose of blow-off valves or bypass valves in general is to do two main functions. One, maintain turbo speed as much as possible during a shift so that the boost comes in really quick. Well, if you dump a bunch of fuel in the exhaust and you cool everything off and you impede the engine's ability to have a clean combustion as soon as you get back on the throttle, then you slow that down. So here you're trying to improve the boost response between gears and have it come back in quicker, but it doesn't because you've ruined the combustion for a handful of cycles and the turbo doesn't have any drive pressure to push it and give you the boost back. So you create slower boost response in between gears. Now, the idea is that when you do the shift, when you shut the throttle plate during a shift, there's a pressure wave of air that's running through the intercooler or the intercooler pipe, whatever it is, hits that throttle body all of a sudden as you shut it, and that wave gets sent back through the piping into the turbo. And it can create a stall in the air, which can make the turbo actually speed up for a second and then slow down. It can make the turbo thrust really aggressively towards the bearing and away from the bearing and that kind of stuff. And also could cause it to slow down a ton, before or after the surge. And so the idea is you want the turbo to maintain the most speed so that when you get back on the throttle again, it's already spinning really fast and the boost comes in really quick. So they said, well, let's vent that air off to atmosphere or to the suction of the turbo, and that turbo will maintain its speed. So if in the factory car, since it's a mass airflow sensor controlled car, they divert the air from the factory bypass valve back to the suction of the turbo, so the turbo maintains its speed and keeps spinning, and there's no air leaks by venting off the atmosphere, right? In cars that are speed density from the factory, which honestly isn't a whole lot of cars nowadays, especially. It doesn't matter if it goes to atmosphere or if it recirculates. But in the case of the Subaru, it's mass airflow sensor controlled. It is not a good idea to have a blow-off valve. You induce a lot of problems, and you cannot tune it out. It's not something you can just, I get to tune my blow-off valve, bro. That's not how it works. So when people ask me what blow-off valve do I recommend, I say no blow-off valve. You should use a stock bypass valve, or if you have a much larger turbo and need more airflow than that, then an aftermarket bypass valve like the Cobb or somebody else. I'm sure there's another one that's good, but I prefer the Cobb one, honestly. Or stock. Stock can handle plenty of airflow for a lot of turbos. So let me just show you the flow path real quick. It's a car that Nick's working on over here. He just dropped his flashlight because I distracted him. Okay, so this intake sits over here, like so. See right here? All right. Air comes in through the filter, goes across the mass airflow sensor. I drop that in the turbo inlet. Can we see this? Turbo inlet goes into the manifold, into the turbo itself. There's the turbo. Then it goes through the intercooler, which would be right here, right in the throttle body. Okay, the bypass valve is right here. It's the bypass valve, the factory one. It's a good choice. Keep the factory one. And so at this point would be where the air would get released to atmosphere if you had a blow-off valve on. So the air would come in the sensor, in through here, out the turbo, out the valve, to atmosphere, and then you get all the extra fuel in the engine and you screw everything up. So hope that helps. Keep the stock valve if you can.